Hello all, my name is Aremel Tibayan. I'm the Vice President of Sona, and I'm joined here today with the creative directors of SuperStudio, Susan Ang and Wei Ui. And we are here joined today by Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta, who will be delivering a design talk for SuperStudio. So I will let Tyson introduce himself.
Hi, how you doing? So I'm Tyson Yunkaporta. I'm a senior research fellow at Deakin out of the Naikiri Institute in the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab. It's part of Naikiri. I'm an Indigenous scholar. I belong to the Upledge clan from Western Cape York. Really good to be here.
Great. Thank you, Tyson.
And currently, I'm living 3,000 kilometers south from where I belong. Currently on Bunurong country. I acknowledge the elders from this place. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Tyson, for the introduction. So we will move on to the questions, which will be led by Susan and Wei. So we'll begin with Susan.
Thanks, Aremel, and welcome, Tyson, to our recorded session. We're delighted to have you with us. I'll say up front, you've done a number of interviews and podcasts, not only in Melbourne, Victoria, but across the country. And you're very busy writing and speaking all the time. So we are very appreciative that you were able to be with us today. And while a Zoom conversation will never replace a yarn over a campfire, I hope that one day we can do that with you. I hope we'll try our best to capture your thinking and your voice in our National Architecture Students Competition. The concept of evolving identity is particularly relevant to us in Australia, and we felt very, very timely for thinking about conceptualizing the future for the built environment and all the contributors to it, and that includes architects, academics like ourselves, and researchers. So your book, Sand Talk, is much celebrated. From what I know, it offers Indigenous thinking and insight into how knowledge is formed and passed on. For those of us with a different frame of reference for our identities, it offers an Indigenous way of looking at the world and a different way of making sense of things. And it prompts all of us to reflect upon the concept of identity from our individual and shared perspectives. I'd like to ask what you think about the theme, the two words, evolving identity. What do they mean to you, Tyson?
Well, I think that as as forces, places, and landscapes, political, economic, and physical landscapes shift and are really quite horrendously in flux right now. This is what shifts identities, because in the end, identities are profoundly place-based and they come out of a place. That's how it is naturally. However, over the last century or so, it's become more and more power-based. It's about a power relationship more than anything else. And so you have postmodernism has arisen as a response to those power dynamics, which has shifted the way people form their identities, rather than being about a bioregion and about being connected to a bioregion where a person lives, where the spirit of that bioregion and the unique, ecosystem and culture of that bioregion, informs a person's identity. Instead, it's a lot of like larger, more global power dynamics and structures in place. So most people now define their identities in relation to an imperial center. The East is you're only Eastern in relation to the West, which is the center. You know what I mean? So you have to call yourself that. You're only, in the global South, and that's only down because the global North sort of flipped the original maps up to put themselves on top. And look at where the equator is on the map. It's not right in the middle. It's down a bit from the center. That's to sort of stretch the Northern Hemisphere and make Europe look a bit bigger. Bit of small man complex going on there. everything, even our topography, and the way we see it in our inner maps, this is now in relation to the imperial center. So, I'm only called indigenous because I'm that in relation to a settler culture at the center of things. So we have to shift our identity. Before invasion, we didn't call ourselves indigenous or anything like that. We were just humans, and so was everybody until they encountered cultures of dominance that wanted to call them other than human. And then all of a sudden we had to be, categorized as different kinds of human beings. And, unfortunately, the postmodern sort of backlash to that's evolved over the last decade, it's evolved into something new where everybody takes on as their personal identity. They take on that kind of manufactured group identity that's in relation to the center. And supposedly it's opposing the imperial center, but it's not really. It's just reinforcing it in a lot of ways. The concept of a nation was only invented about a century ago, but people sort of identify with these nations as if they're ancient things that have been around forever, and that they have this sort of biological place in the world, in a static sort of universe where everything is where God put it, and these people come from here and these animals come from here. Whereas it's not the reality in nature. Migration is something that happens all the time, not just with humans, but all different kinds of species. Ecosystems themselves migrate about 100 meters every year. So the fact is that we're on a planet that is fluid and dynamic and constantly in flux, and we move with those relationships of flux, and we move within them. And your identity at any moment is coming from the place that you're inhabiting and knowing intimately, and understanding the seasonal dynamics and the cycles and the changes over deep time. And that's what our real identities are. We kind of have this other sort of flimsy thing mapped over the top right now, a sort of papers, please kind of identity, which is a little bit more shallow and far less satisfying. Lots of interesting struggles and power dynamics going on right now as people sort of struggle for scraps from the table and all the rest. But that will shift as well. And just like that, you had a background up before of a coastline with quite a bit of infrastructure there.
Yes.
There it is there that you can see all that prime real estate there, and the way the coastline's being shaped from an indigenous point of view. That's something that only happened a few seconds ago.
Absolutely.
And it's not going to look like that forever or for very long. Coastlines shift, especially if all the sources of terrestrial sand for your building are gone now, and we're having to dredge all that sand from the bottom of the ocean. And it's the biggest resource on the planet because infrastructure and construction is going through the roof. You won't have to worry about rising sea levels. You'll have to worry about coastlines just slumping into the sea from all that sand that's being removed. So we see that. But after that's underwater, everything in the background, we'll still be caring for it. We'll still be telling the stories of that place. It just means that for quite a bit of time will be under the water, but we'll still be caring for that country and telling the stories of that country there long after you've abandoned it and moved all the infrastructure and the buildings, etc., to higher ground. And I guess that's how our identity works. It's attached to places that even as they shift and change, the spirit of that place is there, and it's a story that we keep and hold on to over deep time. So even as species become extinct, there are species in the fossil record that nobody can tell what color they were or their habits or the sounds they made, but those things remain in our stories. So old people can make the sounds of animals that have been extinct for over 10,000 years. These things remain. And it's really the only way to store data sustainably in the long term is through story, intergenerational story in that way.
Yeah.
Your floppy disks don't work anymore, do they? Pretty much all the other ways you're storing information now, they won't last forever.
As long as humans can continue being on this planet, then
Yeah,
there will always be the better floppy disk.
that's it. That's it. And it's that intergenerational mother to child relation that is the center of all that. You know, that's the motherboard. That's the yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you for your unique perspective. There are a couple of very interesting concepts you have brought up. We talk about the changing nature of nature, in relative to the time zone, which is constantly shifting, and identity being associated to place, and that is kind of very interesting dialogue of the idea of flux. And that is the third thing that you have mentioned. And among that, there are things that ties with our ability to look and translate into as a communication tool to talk about place. As a competition, we are also interested in how those ideas can be expressed. And talking about that, referring back to an interview you had last year with Paul Barclay on Radio National, ABC Radio, you talk about out of Australia. Would you like to share a little bit of the stories of identity that is perhaps personal or helpful for the students?
Right. Well, for me, I have a totemic relation with Brolga, which you might know it as a crane, one of those birds that dance. Yeah. In Latin, it's the Latin scientific taxon is Grus rubicundus. So that bird is my totem, and there's a series of other totems that are associated with that. And that's coming out of a place, and then a series of places in a kind of map over a large territory. And each of those places there is sort of story and a song that is sung through the landscape of where those totemic beings traveled way back, in the creation times. So these form kind of your inner maps. And, if I talk about that Brolga story, and, there's a big fight with an emu because the emu keeps stealing the Brolga's babies. And that moves over a large sort of area. And there's the place at Iklet where the Brolga's body is lying there as an oyster reef in the water. And sort of that's a place where, I go to, spear stingrays and crabs and things like that. There's also a big crocodile there. So as I'm saying this, it's putting me in that place. Like I can see it, but I can see the map as well. And that's a map that is sung and storied. And basically, all humans until very recently lived in that kind of relation, that totemic relation with land. Where your governance, economics, everything was dictated by that sort of biomimicry framework, if you like, but not even mimicry. It's just inseparable from the landscape. So even your cognition still today, you can't remember anything. Your memory only works on spatial and narrative relations. So the human cognition runs on spatial relations, so almost like a mapping, and narrative that sits on those maps. That's still how every human being's brain works, regardless of which region you came from. This is the business that we need to get back to, particularly if we're designing interventions in landscapes, for dwellings, infrastructure, ecological change, anything else, interventions. These are the things that we need to tap into. Yeah, like our gifts, our superpowers as human beings.
Very good.
Yeah, that's obviously very, very valid. And to hear, how you speak about that connection to land. But as we know, there are a lot of people today. We all know a lot of people that have removed ourselves from that connection to the land. In fact, we are enshrined in buildings that have no connection to that land. We are enshrined in workplaces that have lost that, or are disparate to that connection to the land. So short of actually removing ourselves from our urban shrines and our concrete jungles, we have to actually return to places where we can almost feel that intangible connection to the land. And if that then starts to bring about a stronger sense of our identity, then maybe that is what future architects need to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to ask yourself, is a chicken that's locked in a tiny cage and just has to lay several eggs a day, and it's been in there its whole life and its legs don't even work, let alone its wings, is that chicken still a bird?
Exactly. I mean,
and the bigger horror of that is that most of the biomass of avians in the world are chickens that are locked in cages in that way. And it's the same thing that's happening to human beings. So that it's quite urgent to be redesigning very different urban landscapes, etc., and infrastructure. Yeah.
I think that's very powerful that this conversation is recorded and hopefully broadcasted and made available to all these future generations of thinking. It's actually just reframing their thinking about that identity. So we come to maybe the time for only one more question that we can put to you, Tyson. And you've spoken a lot about the identity framed as an ancient identity, place identity, and definitely shifting identity. So we're comfortable with the term evolving identity. And I also want to just touch on the fact that you are someone that has spent a lot of time building and nurturing human relationships wherever you go and talking about them. And you've spoken about how yarning is central to knowing. So how do these concepts of building relationships with humans particularly help us evolve our identities and help us influence the built environments going forward?
Well, it's about having relations to other humans, but also non-humans within the landscape and to place itself. You have to have an intimate relation to place, and you story that and you map that. And you'll find your memory improves, your cognition improves, everything improves in your life, because then you'll be functioning optimally. You seriously need that. And basically the yarning, the connecting with place, all of this is about removing abstractions. There are a lot of abstractions that are currently getting in the way of your work, such as empirical measurements and things like this. So when you're making a building, you're looking at, magnetic north as a direction. Rather than the idea of the sun and seasons sort of shifting and things moving. You're ignoring the way water shifts in the landscape, and the landscape is fluid. So you're not seeing all those things. You're not bringing an intimate knowledge of the place and how it changes over time, what cycles it goes through annually, but then over deep time as well. The way you're measuring things like doorways, you're measuring it with an empirical measurement system, which is also abstracted, rather than measuring it in terms of, the size, shape, and functions of the people who will be using that space. This is why we used to measure things in hands and feet and things like this, because we were, lining that up with our body parts, etc. Level, things like this. There are a lot of abstractions that are they kind of force you to take structures and blueprints from another place and to map them on top of the place where you are, no matter what's going on in that place. So I'd encourage you to, you have to use those things or your house will fall down, of course, but set those things aside initially and form a relationship with the place and the people and the story of the place first. And that will inform your design and allow that process to be collective and to be responsive to the movements of people, but also non-humans in that landscape and the landscape itself, its movements. When you understand all of that, then you can bring in the useful tools of empirical measurement rather than having the empiricism be the abstract, placeless identity that informs your work when you come into a place.
Well, thank you. And we might throw back to Aremel to say a few words at the end.
Yeah, so Tyson, thank you so much for delivering your talk. There's a lot of relevant points that you made that I think that help us as students of design and architecture of creating spaces. But especially your reflection on, just being human. And you made comment such as like the planet is always it's always in flux, and that the identity of ourselves is just formed in the place that we inhabit in. You think um, that just is a reflection, just engages to rethink about how that place forms who you are. And furthermore, you talked about, removing abstraction, and you're in a way trying to step away and trying to rethink and move back, not to be so orderly or systematic towards what you design, but do it something that's natural and something. It's just a human sensitivity, a human response to it. So yeah, I think the points you made throughout this interview were great and will help the
Although orderly and systematic, I mean, a lot of people hear what I say and just assume that means, oh, it's unstructured. No. The orderly and systematic stuff, that's important, and that's a tool that you need to use. But that's not what comes first. What comes first is relation and place.
Of course.
And time. Yeah, nailed it. A+, well done.
Great. Well, that just brings us at the end of the time that we have today with Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta. So Tyson, on behalf of the Australian Institute of Architects, SONA, and Creative Director team for SuperStudio 2021, we say thank you for sharing your views and perspectives on the concept of evolving identity.
My pleasure. See you next time.